Hi there, and welcome to Canada's Clean50 CleanReset series, Clean Transportation, Episode Part 2. If you haven't yet downloaded Part 1, you should do that first. And if you only just played it, you might want to scoot ahead 2.5 minutes to about 2 minutes 40 seconds and skip this recap. This series of webcasts are created in support of an effort by 220 of Canada's Clean50 awardees to encourage governments to undertake a post-COVID clean reset. And to dig deeper into the suggestions we made in an open letter we sent to the federal government back in April. That letter can be found at clean50.com and lays out a winning strategy for how Canada could build back better. I'm Gavin Pitchford, CEO of Delta Management Group, Canada's leading ESG and sustainability professional search firm. We founded the Clean50 back in 2011 to recognize and bring together sustainability leaders from across Canada and to accelerate collaboration towards building a low-carbon future. 4 of those award-winning leaders are with us here today. Josipa Petrunic leads CUTRIC, the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. No one knows more about clean public transportation industry in Canada than she does. In episode 1, she gave us a comprehensive look at every element: the public transit providers deploying electric and hydrogen-powered buses, the manufacturers making them and exporting them across North America, and the enablers, large contractors building the grid and the charging infrastructure to support their deployment. Colin Armstrong is CEO of Hydrogen Technology and Energy Corp, HTEC. He's our country's leading expert on hydrogen-powered vehicle technology and refueling infrastructure. He laid out for us the state of hydrogen-powered vehicle use in Canada right now. Jurgen Puter is CEO of Renewable Hydrogen Canada. He's building the largest source of clean hydrogen fuels in Canada, and in the process is funneling large amounts of waste heat from his plant to provide essentially free heat to Sundance Produce, a large greenhouse run by First Nations. He explained to us some of the opportunities and the obstacle he faces. All 3 laid out a case for what a massive opportunity this represents for our country. Massive employment growth, adding 260,000 jobs over the next few years. Major exports growth of both vehicles and hydrogen, and the shrinking of our GHGs, all enabled by betting on a clean transportation as a key part of our low carbon future. But first, we're going to pick up from last episode with Kara Klarman, who matches Josipa's knowledge of public transportation with her knowledge of electric vehicles for private use. I want to introduce Kara. She's the president and CEO of Plug and Drive. Plug and Drive is an NFP with the goal to accelerate EV adoption due to their enviro and their economic benefits. In her past life, she was an enviro lawyer down on Bay Street and then spent some time at OPG as both their enviro lawyer and their VP of Sustainable Development. She's got 25 years of history in the environmental and sustainability world. She's been driving an EV for 10 years, somehow managing to fuel that without losing her patience, and would never go back to gas. So, Kara, please take us away on make the arguments for EVs.
Thank you so much, Gavin, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, I think actually even the most jaded auto analyst, auto journalist has come around to say it's no longer an if, it's just a when, and how quickly it will happen. So, I mean, the primary arguments for electric vehicles is that they're more cost effective than a gas vehicle. They're much cheaper in the total cost of ownership. Because electricity is much cheaper than gas, even at these crazy low gas prices we're having right now. And of course, no one expects those to last forever. But we're certainly seeing a big saving on the fuel alone. And then maintenance, there's literally no maintenance to do on electric vehicles, very, very minimal. And so in the total cost of ownership, the average Canadian driver will save in the ballpark of $1,500 to $2,000 a year. And that is, I would say, on the conservative side, and depends, of course, on how far you drive. As Josipa said, same for transit buses, the more you drive, the more you save. So people who drive more actually save more. And then, of course, you've got the huge environmental benefit. And I think it was Jurgen who was mentioning, we have a very clean electricity grid in this country. We have, if you look at Ontario, we're mostly nuclear and hydro with a little bit of wind and a very small amount of gas on the peak. We have, BC Hydro is mostly hydro, Quebec, almost all hydro, Manitoba, almost all hydro. So we have many provinces in this country where the emissions from the grid are like, you're going to save a huge percentage of your GHG emissions switching from a gas car to an electric car. In Ontario, it's about 93% reduction in emissions. Quebec, it's upwards of 95, and so on. And even in the provinces, we often will hear, well, it makes sense if your grid is clean, but what about in a province like Alberta or Saskatchewan where electricity is generated partially by coal or natural gas? Then what's the point of an electric vehicle? Well, actually, it still offers you a pretty significant improvement, not as big of a GHG reduction as you get in Ontario or Quebec, but you're still going to get about a 25 to 30% reduction. Because, of course, the entire grid is not fossil, and you're going to have, of course, some wind and some water, hydro on the grid. So there's that. And also, a large coal plant is more efficient than a small internal combustion engine. So you still get quite a significant benefit. And year over year, of course, their grids are getting more clean. And so every year you drive the car gets a little bit cleaner. So those would be the big arguments for EVs. It's environmental and economic. And also, the challenge is still, as was mentioned, people have concerns around range and around price. And those concerns continue. I have to say, a lot of them are more psychological than real, as you already heard from one of our speakers. It's actually the bulk of us plug in at home at night. And so if you look at Canadian drivers, 80% of Canadians drive 50 kilometers or less a day. Most of us are just commuting back and forth. Most of us are not taking Canada-wide road trips. And if we do, we're doing that once in a blue moon. And so to kind of think about your vehicle for that one-off trip doesn't necessarily make sense. On the one-off trip, you can rent, you can take a train, you can borrow from a friend, you can do car share, you can do something else. And so for the 99.9% of your trips, the EV is perfect. And I have actually found now that the vehicle's ranges are improving. Now I have an EV that has 500 kilometers of range. I mean, I don't even think twice about it. I can get to Montreal in one shot. So it's become easier and easier, and also the infrastructure has really improved. And so those long distance trips are actually much more feasible than they were even 2 years ago. So although I want to emphasize the long distance trip is not the key, and we shouldn't focus on it, it is possible now to do the long distance trip. So I do think they're feasible. Of course, electricity infrastructure is already in your home. And so really there's very little to do to be ready for an EV. Where the challenge remains is on multi-unit. Certainly if you live in a condo or an apartment building, it's not always simple to have a home plug, and we need to do a lot more work on that. And then, of course, the upfront price is still a bit of a challenge, because sometimes that price is still a little bit higher than the comparable gas car. And we have to help people see they're going to save money year over year, but not everyone is going to want to pay now to save later. And that's a challenge, for the industry. And that's where some creative financing, for example, could really help.
Okay, again, wanted to say I agree entirely, and in particular for domestic travel or private travel in an urban environment, nothing can beat an electric plug-in car. It's fully clear. Hydrogen has perhaps an advantage over heavy-duty, long-distance and other applications, but for short distance, particularly if you have an overnight plug-in capability, it's the only way to go.
Tara, I want to come back because I know you've done some research on the impact of EVs on our health. And I'd love to hear about that and how it would impact if everybody was driving an EV instead of an internal combustion engine vehicle.
Thanks, Gavin. It's funny because we focus a lot in the EV sector on the environmental benefit, on the economic benefit, but we haven't spent much time talking about the health benefits. But a very recent study was released. We all suspected there would be big benefits, reducing air pollution, but we didn't have the data. And a very recent study, literally released last week, which can be found at clearingtheair.ca. It was put out by Environmental Defence and Ontario Public Health. And it actually showed the massive social benefit, including health benefits, if the fleet were to be turned over to electric. And what they found actually was that you could prevent, just from electrifying, this is just vehicle fleet, SUVs and trucks, you could save about 300 lives annually, save about $2.5 billion in different social benefits, including hospital visits and health problems and other things, and you'd get almost 8 megaton GHG annual reduction. So when you add that all up, it's something in the ballpark of almost $10 billion in social benefits. It's a huge opportunity.
So we had a program in Ontario, and we'll look at what was and what is now. We had a government program earlier that incented consumers to buy electric vehicles. And any idea how much we are, and this is an unfair question because you may not have the answer. Do you know how much that was paying out on an annual basis at the time it was in place?
I don't know what it was paying out, but definitely much less than the social benefits. Much less.
You can see where my thinking is going.
Yeah, much less. And in fact, the other thing, even just without the health benefit, if you do the math just on the economic benefit to the province. So when you think of it, if you plug in your electric car at night, you're plugging into, here in Ontario, you're plugging into Ontario Nuclear Hydro. Those are owned by the government, more or less. Those are owned by us. And so those people plugging in for a couple of years, the government makes their money back on the electricity rates that you're paying to fuel your car instead of paying for oil and gas. They make their money back on those rebates just on straight electricity. And so this is like a complete added bonus in terms of the benefits to the province of electrifying. It makes tons of sense.
With that, let's start to turn to what can the government do, both federal and provincial at different levels across the country, to incent consumers, and what should they be doing, and should that be part of a clean reset?
Absolutely needs to be part of a green reset, because actually there is a huge jobs opportunity in this sector as well. Clean Energy Canada put out a report last year looking at clean tech jobs across Canada, and that report found right now there's about 300,000 workers, us all probably all included, working in the clean energy field. And if you know, we sort of project out to 2030, they projected that to double. So about 600,000 jobs in 2030 in clean energy. And if you look at clean transportation alone, it's going to be about half of that, almost 300,000 jobs in the sector. So huge job opportunity. And so that's just another reason that the government needs to be thinking about how to make it part of a clean reset. And so what I would recommend if we're thinking about what should the government do, the number one barrier, we've done a lot of research in this area, the number one barrier to EV adoption continues to be upfront price. Sticker price does deter people, even though you're going to save over time, total cost of ownership is less. So we need to be looking at ways to incent people. That could be creative financing, that can be maintaining incentives, that could even be a declining incentive over time, because we know that we're going to hit price parity in the near future, maybe 2024, 25. So incentives are not needed forever. So you might want to show that it's not needed forever by having a declining incentive. We can't wait for the market to just do its thing, because although we know it will happen eventually, I think in this group, we all agree that there's a climate emergency on, and if we just wait for the market to take its course, it's too slow. So we need to encourage it. That can be financial incentives for vehicles. And I would like to make a pitch for used electric vehicles, because first of all, they're extremely affordable. They still need to plug in, so you still get all those benefits. It is a way to attract a demographic of folks that maybe thought they couldn't afford an EV, or their first car buyers, or, people that maybe thought an EV wasn't in the cards for them. And they get you away from this discussion of, EVs are for wealthy people only, which is not the case, but it is a common misconception. So I do think that encouraging used it is a great opportunity. And then the other thing that I think governments need to do is things that actually don't cost them very much money, which is policy changes around multi-unit and condo in building codes and condo acts, to ensure those new buildings are being built with the electrical capacity and with the rough-in for the plugs, because those buildings are going to be here for 50 years and we know we're going to need them. So it doesn't make sense that the building code does not require today at least the rough-in for that possibility of plugging in. So I'd like to see that. That exists, of course, in a bunch of municipalities, Vancouver in particular. We see a little bit of it in Ontario, but we aren't seeing it Canada-wide. They could mandate it in the national building code, and then all the provincial building codes would adopt it. And so that's a very simple thing that could be done that would make a huge difference.
And I think there's a lot of jobs in charging stations, are there not? In terms of both personal, individual charging stations as well as multi.
So as I mentioned, there's a lot of job opportunities. They include electricians for installation of both home and commercial charging. They include mechanics to fix EVs. There are literally no mechanics right now that are experienced with EVs. There's also the software, hardware side of things. There's the logistics side of things. There's all sorts of jobs in the EV charging space. And you see actually a number of Canadian companies as well as foreign companies that have a Canadian presence. So we're definitely seeing a lot of growth in this area. And then, of course, there's all the jobs relating to battery storage, reuse of EV batteries. There's a lot of job opportunities.
Let's talk about jobs for a minute, and then let's talk about beyond that. Let's talk about what the government can do to incent those various sectors that will create jobs so that we can get to a clean reset.
In terms of the jobs on the EV charging side, if we think about heavy duty bus in particular, this is a real issue right now. It's a huge job growth opportunity. But if you think about what's happening in most transit agencies in Canada, unless it's Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver with subway systems, or Ottawa, Calgary, Edmonton, or Waterloo with LRT systems, there are no real engineers at the transit agency level whose job it is to operate and maintain high power equipment. So when you're looking at York Region or Brampton or Laval or Saskatoon, these transit agencies need to outsource that duty or choose to in-house a huge engineering cadre of maintenance folks to operate and maintain the energy storage devices and the high power charging systems. Most agencies don't want to do that. They want to pay someone fee for service to do that job. And if you look at the manufacturers, ABB and Siemens and others, they don't really want to offer that service. It's out of the scope of what they really focus on, which is the design and manufacture of heavy duty equipment. So there's this nice, beautiful gap right in between transit agencies going electric and wanting to pay someone to take care of all the electrical equipment, make sure it works 24 hours a day, and the manufacturers of that equipment that are willing to help out, but they don't want to offer that service. From an electrification standpoint for heavy duty, we've long advocated that subsidies for electric buses are pretty much useless. And the reason that they're useless is because an electric bus is, say, $1.1 to $1.2 million. A fuel cell bus is 1.4 to 1.7. A diesel bus or a CNG comparative is somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000. So a subsidy by the federal or provincial governments that hands over $500,000 or $600,000 to make up the differential might motivate agencies to start thinking about electric buses, but it doesn't actually get the electric buses out the door because there's no money there for the chargers, the energy storage, the facility redesign, and that facility redesign has to happen as soon as you have more than 5 or 6 buses. So it's a whole system play. Therefore, what we've advocated and what the government can do, we've advocated for Infrastructure Canada and Natural Resources Canada to really hold hands going forward and say, look, it's not about funding electric buses. It's about funding the electrification of the system. Wherever the tax dollar goes, whether you need the money to overhaul your depot, install a storage device, install a smart charging system, install en route charging, or offset the cost of the electric bus, however you use that dollar as a transit agency, you should have the power to use infrastructure dollars for infrastructure energy overhaul. It shouldn't be just electric bus or fuel cell bus differential subsidies, because that will go nowhere. It will just not get us to the 5,000 buses. There's an immediate stop on the systems overhaul. So that would be our biggest piece. And that's not new money. I mean, government is looking right now, not only in a post-COVID world, but prior to that as well, on climate action that's heavily invested in green infrastructure. We know billions of dollars are going to go out the door and have already gone out the door for green infrastructure, tethering it to systems electrification, which includes the system cost for hydrogen fueling and hydrogen fueling integration. That is the way to approach the greenification of our transit agencies, rather than these one-off subsidies that in the past have been kind of the trendy focal point for a lot of policy in North America.
Thank you. Jürgen, Colin, to you first. Where's the jobs and what can the government do to incent those?
So HTech is hiring. We look across the country for people, and you can't find people with experience in hydrogen, right? It's just not there. So we putting in training programs for that, but we see huge growth in really, like Josipa says, the helping people operate these at their facilities. They're way more complex than putting in a diesel system at your transit facility or at an existing gas station. So lots of growth on the hydrogen side of things, from the generation that Jürgen's talking about to the distribution. Canada has a great manufacturing company in Calgary which is where I got into hydrogen, and is making hydrogen cylinders. The infrastructure, the compression systems, Hydrogenics, PowerTech, ourselves, we all make them, assemble them in Canada. So it's Canadian technology. We're exporting it. We're just about to ship a system to South Africa. We're doing projects in California. So there's lots of opportunity. And the faster we adopt ourselves, the more we will develop those skills that are good internally, as well as export to the huge number of countries that are going to transition over to electrification, hydrogen. They're the same things in my mind as well. So yeah, huge amount of opportunity. What can the government do? I would say the clean fuel standard is hugely important to drive a lot of activity, and it has to be framed in a way that allows innovation and promotes adoption of these clean options that we're talking about. So that's hugely important. The zero emission vehicle mandates that are in place in British Columbia and in Quebec need to be changed a little bit. Millions of dollars are going out of the country to Tesla because companies are having to buy credits, and they should be allowed to invest in fueling infrastructure, in our case, charging infrastructure, as opposed to sending money across the border. So there's some tweaks in those programs, but they're hugely important in driving adoption because it forces the suppliers on both cases, the low carbon fuels and the ZEVs, for the suppliers of the products to do something. And you have to mandate those guys to do that. So those are the two things. On the financing side, I think absolutely right. There has to be some more creative and flexibility on the debt financing world of things. And we're competing against debt that is very low cost to the whole gasoline and diesel supply chain. And our uncertainty from technology as well as market demand just ramps up our debt costs, and i.e. the cost of fuel itself. So that'd be my recommendation.
Is there a specific incentive that could be part of the government clean reset spending right now, or is what I'm hearing from you is regulations more important?
Regulation is important. I would advocate, I mean, as I say, I would suggest it's debt financing mechanisms through either BDC or EDC that are directly for the fuel supply infrastructure. In our case, hydrogen, same on the charging side of things. And it needs to be coordinated. For us to pull a station project together, we're talking provincial, federal, car companies. This is very complex. So if there was an integrated strategy from the financing side of things, it would allow it to go much, much quicker.
Jürgen, I know that your project has ended up employing a number of former oil workers who are now, I'm sure, much happier because they're doing good rather than extracting fossil fuels. They're basically boiling water to create energy instead. But give us some more detail in terms of what's there and what the opportunity is that you see. And what tweaks the government could add that would make your life easier?
I think it's again regulation. We need to have a federal standard for introduction of hydrogen into the gas system because it's a federal jurisdiction. Gas lines go interprovincial and also international. So that's one very important thing into enabling the transition of renewables into hydrogen. And the second thing is we need to put a higher price on carbon. BC has taken a leadership position. The Clean50 program has put price on certain things. For example, the BC government requires that 15% of all natural gas be renewable by 2030. That's requiring a huge amount of energy, great opportunity. But these programs need to be replicated across the country, hopefully also federally, and with teeth in them. And then the market will take care of that. In our perspective, we don't see the financing as a problem. We see really the problem enabling using the resources we have. And in Canada, we're unique. We have the low-cost energy. There's a huge export potential here. So not only do we see producing hydrogen for the Canadian market, which is relatively small, but our primary focus is set in California, Korea, Japan, and China. And again, all of this has to start somewhere. It's a chicken and egg situation. Our demand in Canada is not large enough to go to the scale we're doing. Our first plant is 67 tons of hydrogen a day. All of Canada probably will take a long, long time to consume that much hydrogen. So we have to also use the hydrogen not only for the transportation sector, but also for the build sector, office buildings, heating, cooking. That's where the gas comes in. And that's also where the synergy with the storage comes in. And that requires federal policy changes and pricing of carbon. And those two are the key ones. We don't really need subsidies, I don't think. It's mostly enabling legislation, and the rest will come.
Is there barriers to that? I'm guessing that there's people who don't want you to have those policy changes, or they would have already been made?
Well, I'm going to be careful what I say here, but there are the incumbents, shall we say it, other known as the oil and gas companies, who control the distribution network and everything. And it's been a wonderful business. They had us by the short and curlies for 100 plus years, and giving that unique position up is not something you do voluntarily and happily. The transition is occurring. They all know the writing on the wall, and I think they will obviously be interested in delaying that onset of the transition to clean as much as possible, but they can't stop it. And I think increasingly more so at some senior levels in these large organizations, that knowledge is becoming established, and that there is a rapid change about to come, but government can play a role by initiating that. And there's a carrot and a stick approach. The carrot is there's a new opportunity to redeploy the technology and expertise that has been developed in the oil and gas sector. And the second thing is there's money to be made in exporting power and building the infrastructure that enables hydrogen. So if you look at from the perspective of these large energy companies, there's an incentive for them to do this. And it's not a question of if, it's only when. And we're hoping that government can accelerate that process. The capital markets are there if the market exists. That's the capital is not the problem. You need to have a market to sell the equipment or the fuel. And again, we think enabling lower cost fuel will enable the transition to, particularly in the heavy duty transportation sector and in the build sector, the adaptation of hydrogen. So the government policies to enable hydrogen introduction at a higher price on carbon will accelerate that. Just to put in perspective, this first plant we're building will take 200,000 tons of CO2 out of just the gas supply. And that's, of course, not counting the ancillary benefits when you use it also in the transportation sector. So there's some very big opportunities. For example, if you substitute hydrogen for natural gas and you go put a certain portion of the hydrogen into compressed gas vehicles or even LNG facilities like we have here in BC. BC Ferries now runs a lot of their ferries on LNG, and the transit agencies use CNG. The more hydrogen you have in there, the lower the carbon footprint.
Gavin, I would add one key point that perhaps comes out of a lot of the discussion about how do we motivate the market to move into electrified vehicles and into hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, both on the bus side and on the individual personal passenger car side. And there's one overarching policy on the back end that has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with the kinds of cities we want to build, which is road pricing. And if we really want to drive the marketplace into these vehicle technologies, well, then we have to drive people out of gasoline cars to start with. And that means pricing roads, pricing and tolling roads per kilometer, pricing parking spots, and giving a break to electrified and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So the pricing of roads alone will drive people into transit, which gives transit more revenue at the fare box to pay for all of these technologies. And the pricing of roads, but giving a break to electrified vehicles for a temporary period of time, allows those folks who want to stay in their personal passenger car to at least reduce their emissions profile and motivate the procurement. Without discussion of road pricing and preferential treatment of electrified vehicles, we will not get the clientele into transit, and we won't get the clientele into these vehicles at the extent and level needed to drop those price points and really be able to create sustainable models.
Yeah, Gavin, I think the big message to the federal government is to truly recognize that both battery electric transportation and hydrogen are needed to meet our climate goals. There's absolutely no question about that. And there's a huge opportunity for jobs, for local deployment and global exports of technology, jobs, and energy. Very simply put.
100% agree with that. And Gavin, it's Kara. I think that in addition to that, we can deploy chargers and we can, have the vehicles. But what we're finding is there still is a big knowledge gap and people don't understand these cars. They don't understand how they work. They still believe that somehow it's going to be less effective for them or less easy for them somehow in their life. And so there still is a big need, and not to, sort of beat our own drum at Plug and Drive, but there is a big need for education and to help people get over their concerns and help them to realize actually, I must hear it every day. People say, oh yeah, EVs and hydrogen cars, that's the future. And that's great. But I say, yeah, it is, but it's also right now. And we want to help people understand that it's doable today, not just 5 years from now.
Well, I think I agree with everything I've heard. We need to work on getting the cost of ownership for both electric and fuel cell vehicles down. And our part is that by enabling the production of hydrogen at lower, increasingly lower cost, and storing it in the gas pipeline network, I think we have a low-hanging fruit. We hope it can be enabled with appropriate policies from government, but it doesn't really require more subsidies. It just needs targets saying that the carbon reduction has to come, and it's a low-hanging fruit. And then, as an example, go over to Germany. They just put $9 billion into hydrogen. They don't have the resources we have in Canada, so we are in a much better position. But we can take, I think, some cues from what they're doing over there.
A quick question. Does anybody know how much the Canadian government puts into hydrogen in this country?
I haven't seen any, so I wouldn't know.
I would say in the maybe 10 to 20 million range.
That's on a scale against 9 billion for Germany?
Euros.
9 billion euros. Okay, so ballpark 15 billion, 14 billion Canadian?
Australia just committed to a $300 million hydrogen fund.
And they have a smaller population and smaller economy than ours?
Having said that, Natural Resources Canada did just come out indicating that they are funding currently a hydrogen road mapping activity. So at some point in the summer, I believe the Canadian government will come out with a national hydrogen roadmap of some sort, giving us greater clarity on our pathway forward.
I want to thank all of our panelists today. You guys have been outstanding and as I said at the outset, experts in your field, each of you. And so it's been so great to have you on this panel. I think what we've heard is that there's a huge opportunity for Canada to embrace a much cleaner transportation future by using both EVs and hydrogen-powered vehicles, that there's jobs, that there's enormous opportunity to cut back on our GHGs in the process. And it isn't so much money that's needed, so much as a clear direction from the federal government in the way of regulation that would be helpful in driving these changes. And so part of our clean reset needs to be a change in in regulation and knowing, providing some certainty for people in your industry that there's a future, but also signaling clearly to Canadians this is the now, not the future. Having said all of that, there could certainly be some strong incentives continue to be added to adopting EVs that would help bring down the price initially and perhaps incent people to install charging stations in their homes or their businesses and or their multi-tenant dwellings. Have I captured the majority of the key points of today?
I think so.
Tremendous. I want to thank all of you so much for being on the cast. I want to encourage the people who are listening to this or watching it that you check out the other casts that are out there from the Clean50 CleanReset program. We've got casts that are dealing with energy, clean tech, renewable energy, the circular economy, how we finance all of this, and most importantly, how we transition to a new and cleaner economy. Those are available on the same channels that you're getting this one from. And if you've got somebody who is couldn't possibly be as good as any of our panelists, but somebody that you think is doing remarkable things for sustainability in Canada, please go to clean50.com and nominate them so that they might be on a panel in the future. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. I think the Clean50 program has brought a lot of very interesting things together in Canada and shows that we have the ability, if we focus our interests, to become a leader globally. And thank you for being able to participate in this interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Gavin and the Clean50 for putting this on. I think it's been really, really informative even for me to learn from others. And I hope that the people listening will really take something away from it and help us build that green economy that we all want. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to say thanks so much to all of the colleagues on the line here today and to the team at the Clean50, because I think we've just got a lot of great ideas and great people trying to make this country a greater place and trying to save the planet. And there's no way to do that without dialogues and discussions like this. Let's hope it leads to action.
Yeah, thanks Gavin and the crew, the colleagues here. I think hopefully our passion shows through and we can help translate that to action across the country. It's an exciting place to be, and it's a hugely exciting opportunity for all Canadians. So appreciate you getting the message out to everybody.
I'm going to close by saying to anybody watching this, the critical thing is incenting the government to change. And that happens when you pick up the phone and call your MP or write them, send them an email and say you want a clean reset. We had evidence in another cast that 58% of Canadians support a clean reset over business as usual and that are very focused on addressing climate change with our reset. It's important that you let your MP know that you're part of that 58%. As Canadians, we're always told that the fossil fuel extraction industry is the beating heart of our economy. That's absolutely not true. And here's the other thing. $1 million invested in the fossil fuel industry produces just 2.7 jobs. $1 million invested in any of the Clean Reset programs on which we were suggesting that government focus produces somewhere between 5 and 20 jobs. Clean jobs, jobs of the future, and programs where taxpayer investment would typically be fully repaid to the government within 2 to 3 years. It's not just spending. Government can drive immediate jobs action by making some basic regulatory changes. The Clean50 Clean Reset plan includes a broad range of ideas for government reset action, captured in a series of webcasts, podcasts, and videos, all featuring Clean50 award-winning experts. I encourage you to watch or listen to them all and get them from the same place where you consumed this one. More importantly, I'll ask you to do 2 other things. The first is to forward links to these videos to all of your elected officials. In particular, let's get MPs of all parties better educated on what the low carbon economy can look like for Canada, because many don't have a really good idea. The clean economy is durable, well-paid jobs that are not reliant upon the price of oil, as determined by Vladimir Putin or some Saudi sheikh. And the second thing is to send an email, or even better, make a phone call to your MP. Ask them to vote for a clean reset going forward. Tell them it's time to build a low-carbon Canada for the 21st century. For more information on the Clean 50 and all our past award winners, please visit clean50.com. I'd like to thank the Trache Family Foundation and the Ivy Foundation for their incredible support, as well as that of our other sponsors who contributed to making these casts possible. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to thank you for contacting your MP. It's critical. Let's make sure that this time through we have a clean reset.